What if the stars could tell us more than just what sign we were born under? What if they whispered the hidden motives, the inner strengths, and even the downfalls of the most powerful women in English history? Imagine standing in the grand halls of the Tudor court, where every choice could mean triumph or tragedy. Now, picture those choices not only shaped by politics and power, but also by the heavens themselves. Could it be that the rise and fall of queens like Catherine of Aragon and Boleyn, Jane Seymour, and of Cleves, Catherine Howard Mary, and Elizabeth were written in the stars long before history unfolded? Astrology has always fascinated people because it offers a bridge between the personal and the universal. And when applied to the lives of Tudor queens, it becomes even more compelling. These women were not only caught in the storm of Henry VIII's reign, but also reflected cosmic energies that shaped their personalities, decisions, and destinies. From Catherine's unwavering faith to Anne Boleyn's daring ambition, from Jane Seymour's calm presence to Elizabeth's calculated brilliance, their charts reveal layers of meaning that history books alone often miss. So, what secrets might their celestial maps reveal? Could their tragedies and triumphs have been guided by the pull of planets and stars? And what can we, centuries later, learn about our own lives by looking at theirs through this astrological lens? Stay with us as we uncover the cosmic stories behind some of history's most iconic queens. Welcome to our channel Words of Time, and in this video we'll dive deep into astrology and the Tudor queens, exploring how the stars may have influenced the extraordinary lives and lasting legacies of the Tudor queens. What if the stars whispered secrets about the most powerful women in English history? The idea may sound strange to some and fascinating to others, but astrology has long claimed to offer insights into personality, destiny, and the unseen forces that shape human lives. When we turn that lens on the lives of queens, princesses, and influential consorts, we open a window into a world where politics, power, and personal character collide. This is not about proving astrology as a science, but about using it as a storytelling tool, a way of reimagining familiar history through a symbolic framework that has been around for centuries. Astrology has never been far from royal courts. In the Middle Ages, monarchs often consulted astrologers before important battles or marriages. Queens and kings might have considered the placement of the moon, the sun, or the stars before making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Even if modern readers do not take astrology literally, the symbolism it offers can be a way to reflect on ambition, leadership, romance, and tragedy in the lives of these women. It gives us a creative way of exploring their stories and asking new questions about why they acted as they did. When we think of some of the most famous women in English history, their lives often read like myths already. They face dramatic turns of fate, rise and fall from power, and leave behind legacies filled with both admiration and controversy. To overlay astrology on top of their lives is to deepen this sense of drama, because astrology thrives on archetypes. A sign like Leo represents confidence, leadership, and charisma. A sign like Virgo brings to mind meticulous planning, intelligence, and a critical eye. A sign like Scorpio suggests passion, secrecy, and sometimes danger. These are traits we can see reflected in the decisions and reputations of queens and princesses. Let us imagine what it means to say that Elizabeth I was a Virgo, or that Queen Victoria was a Gemini, or that Princess Diana was a Cancer. These labels do not reduce them, but they give us a way of seeing the tension between their private selves and their public roles. For example, Elizabeth I was known for her careful control of her image and her strategic decisions, qualities that align neatly with Virgo's reputation for precision and discipline. Victoria was both lively and cautious, a combination that speaks to the duality often associated with Gemini. Diana was known for her emotional openness and empathy, which connects to the nurturing and sensitive qualities often tied to Cancer. By rereading their stories in this way, we are not replacing history, but adding another layer to it. It allows us to treat queens not only as historical figures, but also as characters in a larger cosmic story. Astrology often reminds us that individuals are shaped by forces beyond their control. For queens, this sense of destiny feels especially appropriate because they lived lives where birth itself determined their path. They were born into crowns, titles, and duties. Astrology adds a second layer of fate, suggesting that the moment of birth set their personality and destiny into motion. This approach also lets us see how certain astrological archetypes repeat across generations. We might notice that many royal women carry qualities of Leo, the sign of royalty and drama, even when they were not literally born under that sign. Others embody Capricorn traits of ambition and endurance, or Libra traits of diplomacy and charm. These patterns remind us that beyond the facts of their reigns, these women have always been symbols as much as individuals. The language of astrology is rich with images of power, balance, conflict, and transformation. When applied to royal figures, it feels almost natural because their lives are already full of symbolic weight. A queen's marriage is never just her own, it is a union of nations. A child's birth is not just a private event, it is the hope of succession. Every choice echoes outward, and astrology, with its cycles and archetypes, mirrors this sense of larger-than-life consequence. There is also something compelling about considering how these women might have been viewed if astrology were taken seriously as a measure of destiny. Would advisors have told a Cancer queen to lean into her compassion while warning her against excessive vulnerability? Would they have told a Leo queen to use her charisma wisely, but to guard against arrogance? These imagined conversations allow us to see history with fresh eyes, even if they are speculative. Astrology has often been dismissed as entertainment, but for centuries it was treated with deep seriousness. Monarchs had horoscopes cast, and political decisions sometimes turned on celestial advice. The royal women of England lived in times when astrology was not merely a parlor game, but a tool of power. Even when not explicitly guiding them, its language was part of the culture that surrounded them. To re-examine their lives through this framework is therefore not entirely anachronistic, but a continuation of a historical practice, one where destiny and the stars were in telling their stories this way, we can explore not only their political triumphs and failures, but also their inner struggles. Astrology is, at its heart, about personality, desire, and the balance between strengths and weaknesses. To imagine Elizabeth as a Virgo is to highlight her analytical nature, but also her tendency to overthink. To picture Victoria as a Gemini is to emphasize her lively curiosity, but also her shifting moods. To see Diana as a Cancer is to underline her empathy, but also the deep wounds that came with such openness. These interpretations may not be scientific, but they enrich the way we tell their stories. Astrology also adds a poetic rhythm to history. It reminds us that people are not only actors in a political drama, but also part of a cosmic story, tied to the movement of planets and stars. Whether we believe in it or not, there is beauty in imagining the lives of queens illuminated by constellations, their choices framed by archetypes that have been told and retold across cultures. This makes their stories feel less distant, because astrology is a language that speaks to personal struggles as much as public triumphs. The question is not whether astrology is true, but what it reveals when applied as a metaphorical lens. It reveals that power has a personal cost, that leadership involves both strength and vulnerability, and that destiny can be both chosen and imposed. For queens, these lessons are magnified. They had little choice about their positions, yet they shaped their reigns with their personalities. Astrology gives us a way of exploring how character and circumstance interacted to create history. As we move forward in this exploration, we will not treat astrology as a prediction, but as a form of interpretation. We will see how the signs, planets, and archetypes illuminate the lives of royal women, from medieval queens who secured dynasties to modern figures who reshaped the image of the monarchy. Their stories are already rich, but through astrology, we find a new dimension. It allows us to ask what the stars might have whispered to them and what they might whisper to us about power, fate, and the lives of women at the heart of English history. The Tudors are often remembered as one of the most dramatic and captivating dynasties in English history, and the queens of this house continue to fascinate centuries later. When we bring astrology into the conversation, their stories take on another layer of meaning, because their lives were marked by intense personal choices, high political stakes, and the constant presence of destiny. Each of these queens embodied traits that, when read through the language of the stars, seem almost predestined. Their reigns, marriages, and fates feel as if they could have been written into the heavens long before they played out in palaces and courts. The Tudor queens were not simply wives, mothers, or rulers. They were central figures in shaping the course of a kingdom. Astrology offers us a symbolic lens for re-examining their courage, ambition, heartbreak, and triumph, drawing connections between their inner worlds and the great tides of history they navigated. Catherine of Aragon, the first of Henry VIII's 6 wives, remains one of the most admired and tragic figures in English history. She was born into Spanish royalty, raised with both faith and political training, and married into England with the expectation of securing a dynasty. Astrologically, her life fits well with the qualities often tied to the sign of Sagittarius, which values honor, truth, and resilience. Catherine embodied these traits through her unwavering loyalty to her marriage and her steadfast refusal to accept the annulment that Henry sought when she failed to produce a surviving male heir. Her dignity in the face of public humiliation and personal loss resonates with the Sagittarian image of someone guided by principles above all else. Even in her downfall, she held to her identity, a reminder that sometimes the stars speak less to victory and more to the strength of character in adversity. And Boleyn, the second queen, is perhaps the most controversial of Henry's wives. Her allure, intelligence, and ambition helped her rise from lady-in-waiting to queen, a climb that seemed almost destined. And story fits well with the archetype of Scorpio, a sign often associated with intensity, passion, secrecy, and transformation. She was magnetic and polarizing, able to command the king's devotion and the court's attention. Yet, like Scorpio's shadow side, her story also carried danger. The same qualities that drew Henry to her, her sharp wit, her independence, her refusal to conform, were turned against her when she was accused of treason and adultery. Her fall was swift and brutal, but her legacy endures. The daughter she bore, Elizabeth, would go on to become one of England's greatest monarchs. Through the lens of astrology, and becomes the embodiment of Scorpio's transformative power, a figure whose intensity reshaped the monarchy and whose legacy outlived her by generations. Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, offers a striking contrast. She is often remembered as gentle, modest, and dutiful, qualities that align with the archetype of Cancer. This sign is associated with nurturing, motherhood, and a quiet strength rooted in care for others. Jane gave Henry the son he long desired, Edward VI, but she died shortly after childbirth. Her brief reign and tragic death evoke the nurturing but sacrificial image often tied to Cancer. Unlike in our Catherine, Jane left little room for controversy. Her memory is tied more to what she gave through her role as mother than to any political or personal ambition. Yet even in her short time, she fulfilled the role the king demanded of her, showing that sometimes astrology highlights not only the brilliance of dramatic figures, but also the quieter power of those who embody the archetype of care. And of Cleves, Henry's fourth wife, occupies an unusual place in this royal tale. Their marriage was arranged for political reasons, and Henry famously rejected her after only a short time, calling her unattractive by his standards. Yet, and may have been one of the most fortunate of his wives, because their marriage was annulled quickly, and she was given wealth, status, and freedom in exchange. She lived a comfortable life in England, respected and secure, while others met much darker ends. If we read her story astrologically, she fits well with the qualities of Aquarius, a sign known for independence, adaptability, and unconventional success. And did not fulfill the traditional role of queen, yet she carved out a unique path for herself, showing resilience and even humor in the face of rejection. While Henry dismissed her, history remembers her as one of the most content of his wives, a woman who avoided the tragedies that befell others. Catherine Howard, the fifth wife, brings us back to drama and tragedy. She was young, lively, and impulsive, traits that resonate with the fiery sign of Aries. Aries is linked to youth, passion, recklessness, and a hunger for experience. Catherine's life followed this pattern. Her energy and charm drew Henry's attention, but her immaturity and indiscretions led to accusations of adultery. She was executed while still in her teens, a victim of both her own choices and the ruthless expectations of the crown. In astrology, Aries is a sign of beginnings, and Catherine's story feels like one cut short before it had time to mature. Her life is a reminder that the qualities that make someone vibrant can also make them vulnerable when they clash with the demands of power. Catherine Parr, Henry's sixth and final wife, rounds out this cycle with the steadiness of Capricorn. Known for her intelligence, maturity, and sense of duty, Catherine managed to survive where others did not. She acted as a companion to the aging king, cared for his children, and even served as regent while he was away at war. Capricorn is often associated with endurance, patience, and wisdom gained through experience. Catherine embodied these qualities, guiding Henry's family through turbulent years and ensuring the survival of his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth, who would later rule in their own right. After Henry's death, Catherine remarried, showing a desire for personal happiness even after years of political caution. Her legacy is one of resilience and quiet strength, a Capricorn story of someone who shoulders responsibility and survives the test of time. The Tudor queens, when seen through the lens of astrology, form a kind of celestial cycle, each one embodying different archetypes that together paint a picture of power, vulnerability, and destiny. Catherine of Aragon stands as Sagittarius, principled and unyielding, and Boleyn shines as Scorpio, intense and transformative. Jane Seymour reflects Cancer, nurturing but sacrificial, and of Cleves carries Aquarius, independent and adaptive. Catherine Howard embodies Aries, fiery and reckless. Catherine Parr closes the circle as Capricorn, steady and enduring. Together, they represent a constellation of archetypes, each playing a role in a drama that shaped England forever. Their stories continue to fascinate not only because of their personal fates, but because of what they reveal about the intersection of personality and power. Astrology deepens this fascination by offering symbols that capture their essence. These women were born into worlds where their choices were limited, yet their personalities left lasting marks. The stars, in this retelling, remind us that their individuality mattered as much as their titles. They were not interchangeable queens, but unique figures whose traits, virtues, and flaws influenced the course of a kingdom. This fascination extends to their legacies. Catherine of Aragon remains a symbol of dignity and faith, and Boleyn of ambition and transformation, Jane Seymour of maternal sacrifice, and of Cleves of independence, Catherine Howard of youthful tragedy, and Catherine Parr of resilience. Their lives continue to inspire books, plays, films, and debates. Astrology simply gives us another vocabulary for why their stories resonate. We see in them the universal struggles of loyalty, desire, ambition, freedom, and survival, told on the grandest stage of all. What binds the Tudor queens together is not only their marriages to one man, but their shared place in a larger story of power and fate. Astrology helps us imagine their inner lives, the strengths they leaned on, and the weaknesses that brought them down. In doing so, it makes their history feel alive, not as a series of dates and events, but as a drama shaped by personality and destiny. It reminds us that behind every crown was a woman with traits, dreams, and struggles, whose life was as influenced by her nature as by the throne she wore. Catherine of Aragon remains one of the most enduring and dignified figures in the long history of English queenship. To understand her through an astrological lens is to see not only the queen who resisted her husband's demand for annulment, but also the woman whose personality and destiny seemed shaped by something greater than circumstance. Her life was one of resilience, and when read alongside her astrological profile, that resilience begins to take on the qualities of a celestial script. Catherine was born on the 16th of December in the year 1485 in Alcalá de Henares, Spain. This date places her sun in Sagittarius, a sign that symbolizes truth, honor, and the search for meaning. These themes echo through every chapter of her life. She was a queen who held firm to her beliefs, even when political winds turned against her, and the fire of Sagittarius helps explain that determination. The Sagittarian sun describes someone who values principle over convenience, who strives toward higher ideals even at great personal cost. Catherine's refusal to accept the annulment Henry demanded after more than 20 years of marriage reveals this essence clearly. Many in her position might have retreated or yielded, but she stood unbroken, declaring herself Henry's rightful wife and England's true queen until her death. This is Sagittarius in its purest form, the seeker of truth who cannot bear to compromise what is just and sacred. For Catherine, her marriage vows were not only a contract between two people, but a spiritual bond that could not be severed by earthly authority. This conviction was her guiding star. Astrology, however, is not only about the sun. It is the interplay of planets, signs, and aspects that creates a more complete picture. Catherine's moon, believed by many astrologers to be in Aries, speaks to her emotional resilience and inner fire. The moon governs one's emotional core, and Aries is linked to courage, independence, and initiative. While Catherine appeared outwardly patient and devout, this lunar placement suggests an inner strength that refused to be silenced. Her emotional responses were not weak or submissive, but filled with quiet courage. This explains why she could stand up to the most powerful man in her world and refuse to declare herself anything but his lawful wife. The Aries moon points to the spirit of a fighter, but a fighter who uses determination rather than aggression. Her Venus, the planet of love and partnership, is thought to have been in Capricorn. Venus in Capricorn often expresses love through duty, loyalty, and responsibility rather than passion alone. This fits Catherine's marriage perfectly. She was devoted to Henry, not in a fleeting romantic sense, but in a deep, enduring way tied to obligation and tradition. Capricorn Venus is steadfast, and Catherine embodied this, never wavering in her loyalty despite betrayal and humiliation. This placement also explains why her identity as queen was so bound up with her marriage. For her, love and duty were one and the same. When Henry tried to dissolve their bond, it was not simply a rejection of love, but of her purpose. Mars, the planet of drive and conflict, in Pisces may have added another dimension to her story. Mars in Pisces is often described as quiet strength, the ability to endure suffering with grace, and the channeling of energy into faith or sacrifice. Catherine's struggles were immense. She endured miscarriages, the loss of children, years of uncertainty, and the humiliation of being cast aside. Yet she bore these trials with grace, embodying the Piscean Mars as someone whose strength came not from outward aggression, but from spiritual endurance. This placement may also explain her deep religiosity. Mars in Pisces often fights not with swords, but with prayer and steadfast faith, and Catherine was renowned for her devotion to the Catholic Church. She saw her suffering as part of a larger spiritual struggle and clung to her faith as her greatest weapon. The challenges in her chart, the difficult planetary aspects, reflect the tension she faced in her life. For example, the square between her Sun in Sagittarius and Saturn, the planet of restriction and hardship, suggests a life where personal truth would often be tested by authority and limitation. Sun square Saturn is a classic aspect for someone who faces obstacles to self-expression and recognition. Catherine's life illustrates this perfectly. Though she was born a princess and became a queen, her identity was constantly challenged by forces beyond her control, by Henry's desire for a son, by political alliances shifting between England and Spain, and by the demands of the Church. Yet this aspect also reveals resilience. Those with Sun square Saturn often emerge stronger through struggle, learning patience and perseverance. Catherine's refusal to surrender to Henry's will is a testament to this. She lived under the weight of Saturn's tests, yet she never let them break her sense of self. Another challenging aspect was likely between her moon in Aries and Pluto, the planet of transformation and power struggles. This placement often indicates emotional upheaval, intense personal trials, and the necessity of facing deep losses. Catherine's repeated pregnancies and miscarriages, her deep longing for a surviving son, and the eventual stripping away of her role as queen all align with this theme. Pluto tests the soul by taking away what it values most, forcing it to discover hidden reserves of strength. For Catherine, these tests came through her role as a mother and wife. She lost children, she lost her marriage, she lost her position, yet she emerged with her dignity intact. This Plutonian lesson reveals itself in her legacy. She may have lost earthly power, but she gained spiritual authority in the eyes of history. Jupiter, the planet of faith and expansion, was strong in her chart as well. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, her sun sign, and its influence can be seen in her devotion to religion and her moral vision of the world. Catherine often turned to faith for guidance, and she viewed her suffering through a spiritual lens. Jupiter's influence gave her not only hope, but a sense of mission. She believed her role as queen was divinely ordained, and this belief gave her the courage to stand against Henry even when it cost her everything. This is why she could face exile and humiliation without bending. For her, Jupiter's voice was louder than Henry's. When we bring all these elements together, Catherine's astrological chart paints the portrait of a woman whose resilience was both personal and cosmic. Her Sagittarius sun gave her integrity, her Aries moon gave her courage, her Capricorn Venus gave her loyalty, and her Pisces Mars gave her quiet strength. The challenges in her chart, Saturn's tests, Pluto's losses, forced her to endure trials that might have broken others. Yet she emerged not as a victim, but as a symbol of faith and perseverance. Her chart shows a person destined not for ease, but for greatness through suffering. Astrology also helps explain why her legacy has endured. Catherine is remembered not only as Henry's discarded wife, but as a queen whose dignity inspired generations. Her unwavering refusal to accept the annulment, her insistence on her rightful place, and her devotion to her daughter Mary all speak to a woman who would not let fate define her without a fight. The stars whisper resilience in her story, showing that her strength was not accidental, but written into her character from the moment she was born. Her life illustrates the tension between free will and destiny, a theme central to both astrology and history. Catherine did not choose to be denied a son, nor did she choose to be cast aside, but she chose how to respond. Her Sagittarian truth, her Aries courage, her Capricorn loyalty, and her Piscean grace all guided those choices. She became more than a wife or a queen. She became a symbol of integrity in the face of political manipulation. Astrology allows us to see this not as random, but as the unfolding of her chart's story, a cosmic script that played out in palaces and courtrooms. When we reflect on Catherine of Aragon's legacy through astrology, we see a queen who lived her life with a moral compass fixed firmly on truth. She embodied the Sagittarian quest for justice, even when it brought her suffering. She bore the trials of Saturn and Pluto, yet she never lost her dignity. She expressed love through loyalty, strength through faith, and courage through endurance. Her story is one of resilience written in both history and the stars. And in this way, astrology does not diminish her but elevates her, reminding us that her unwavering determination was not only human but also, in a sense, celestial. And Boleyn's story has long fascinated historians, writers, and audiences alike, not only because of her rise and fall, but also because of the way her life altered the very fabric of English history. When we step into her story through the language of astrology, we find layers that help us understand both her magnetic appeal and her tragic fate. Born sometime in the spring of 1501, though her exact date remains debated, Anne's chart is reconstructed by astrologers using likely placements and the symbolic qualities of her life. Regardless of the uncertainty of her exact birth time, the patterns that emerge fit the image of a woman who was clever, ambitious, and revolutionary, yet ultimately undone by forces she could not control. Her sun is often thought to be in Gemini, the sign of duality, intellect, charm, and adaptability. The sun in Gemini brings quick wit, eloquence, and a restless spirit, and Anne displayed all these qualities in abundance. She was educated in the Netherlands and later at the French court, where she absorbed refinement, culture, and new ideas that set her apart from other women of the English court. Gemini energy thrives on communication, and Anne was remembered for her engaging conversation, sharp tongue, and ability to hold her own in debates. In a world where women were often expected to remain silent, her Gemini sun shone with originality and boldness. She was not afraid to speak her mind, and her charm made those words resonate. This, combined with her captivating presence, drew Henry into her orbit and eventually led to the religious and political upheaval known as the English Reformation. Her moon is frequently linked to Leo, and if true, this adds another dimension to her personality. The moon governs the emotional self, and Leo brings a need for recognition, affection, and creative expression. Anne's flair for fashion, her striking sense of style, and her ability to command attention in a room align with the Leo moon. She desired admiration, and she knew how to cultivate it. But Leo also represents pride and vulnerability to betrayal. When her admirers turned into accusers, the emotional blow would have been profound. The Leo moon makes her a woman who lived for love and attention, yet whose downfall came in part from the envy and suspicion that such attention inevitably attracted. Venus, the planet of love and allure, is thought to have been in Aries in Anne's chart. This placement gives a fiery, bold, and daring expression of affection. Venus in Aries is passionate, direct, and unafraid to pursue what it desires. Anne's refusal to become Henry's mistress and her insistence on marriage rather than compromise reflect this placement. She was not content to play the submissive role. She wanted to be recognized as queen, with all the authority and dignity that came with the crown. Venus in Aries does not wait passively but takes risks, and Anne's risk was monumental. By holding Henry at a distance, she inflamed his desire and set herself on a path toward queenship. Yet Venus in Aries also brings volatility in relationships, for its intensity can spark both love and conflict. The passion that brought Anne and Henry together also burned out in suspicion and rage. Mars, the planet of drive and ambition, may have been placed in Capricorn in her chart, which would have fueled her determination and sense of strategy. Mars in Capricorn is disciplined, pragmatic, and able to pursue goals with patience and planning. Anne's ascent to the throne was not an accident of chance, but a careful balancing act of charm, wit, and political maneuvering. She knew how to use her position at court to her advantage, and she was willing to wait years until Henry severed ties with the Catholic Church to marry her. This endurance and focus are hallmarks of Mars in Capricorn. But this placement also reveals a sternness and inflexibility once a course has been chosen, and Anne's refusal to yield in times of conflict may have hardened the king's resolve against her when tensions grew. Her chart also reflects the revolutionary spirit that defined her impact. Uranus, the planet of innovation and upheaval, would likely have had strong aspects in her chart. Uranus represents disruption of tradition, and Anne's role in the English Reformation embodies this symbolism. By becoming Henry's wife, she became the symbol of a break with Rome, ushering in the Church of England and altering the spiritual and political course of the nation. She was not merely a passive figure in this transformation. Her influence over Henry and her support for reformist ideas gave her an active role in shaping this seismic shift. Uranus's energy often brings brilliance but also instability, and Anne's life followed this pattern. She was a spark that lit a fire of change, but the same unpredictable energy that elevated her also contributed to her sudden fall. The challenges in Anne's chart point to the forces that led to her tragic downfall. A likely square between her Sun in Gemini and Saturn suggests a struggle between her bright, expressive nature and the heavy restrictions of authority. Sun square Saturn often indicates a life where brilliance is dimmed by judgment, criticism, or opposition from powerful figures. Anne's wit and independence, which had once enchanted Henry, became liabilities as she failed to produce the male heir he craved and as enemies at court gathered against her. Saturn's harsh judgment came in the form of accusations of adultery and treason, charges that silenced her son's brilliance forever. Another difficult aspect may have been between her moon in Leo and Pluto, signaling deep emotional turmoil and destructive power struggles. Anne's need for affection and recognition may have collided with the dark, ruthless undercurrents of court politics. Pluto's influence often strips away what the moon longs for, forcing transformation through loss. Anne's sudden fall from queen to condemned prisoner, her transition from being adored to being reviled, fits this pattern. Pluto brings endings that are both tragic and transformative, and Anne's execution marked not only the end of her life, but the beginning of a legend that has endured for centuries. Yet even in her downfall, astrology reveals the lasting impact of her chart. The same Gemini sun that gave her brilliance also made her a figure of controversy and fascination. The Leo moon that craved admiration ensured that she would never be forgotten, for her story continues to command attention centuries later. Venus in Aries gave her a boldness that broke tradition, while Mars in Capricorn made her an architect of her own fate, even if that fate turned against her. Uranus's revolutionary energy meant that her influence outlived her body, reshaping England in ways no one could have predicted. Anne's tragic end can be seen as the shadow of her astrological strengths. Her ambition, her independence, and her unwillingness to conform were the very traits that brought her to power, yet they also made her dangerous in the eyes of a king who demanded obedience. In this way, her chart reads like a classic tale of brilliance undone by its own intensity. The stars seem to have written her as both a creator of change and a victim of it, a woman destined to burn brightly but briefly. Her legacy, however, remains immense. Through her daughter Elizabeth, Anne's bloodline brought England into a golden age. Elizabeth inherited her mother's wit, charisma, and strength, and she reigned as one of the most celebrated monarchs in history. This continuity suggests that Anne's chart was not only about her own life, but about the generational impact she would have. Astrology often speaks of cycles and inheritances, and in Elizabeth we see the continuation of Anne's celestial story. To read in Boleyn's life through astrology is to see the portrait of an innovator, a woman whose Gemini sun shone with intellect, whose Leo moon craved love and recognition, whose Venus in Aries drove her boldness, and whose Mars in Capricorn gave her focus. The challenges of Saturn and Pluto reveal why her brilliance ended in tragedy, yet the power of Uranus shows why her influence endures. She was more than a queen who lost her life. She was a catalyst of transformation, a spark in the heavens whose light continues to reach us centuries later. Her story, like Catherine's before hers, shows how astrology can illuminate not only character but destiny. It reveals how ambition and intellect can change the course of history, and how those same traits can invite downfall. It shows how a queen's personal chart can align with the fate of a kingdom. And it reminds us that, in Boleyn, the stars seem to have written a tale of brilliance, rebellion, and tragedy that no earthly power could erase. Jane Seymour has often been remembered as the quiet counterpoint to the tempestuous Anne Boleyn who came before her. Where Anne was fire and sharp edges, Jane was softness and calm. Yet her story, though brief, carries immense importance in Tudor history. She was the only one of Henry's queens to give him the son he so desperately wanted, and her death soon after Edward's birth cast a shadow of both fulfillment and tragedy over her memory. To approach Jane's life through astrology is to find a chart that speaks of gentleness, stability, and the ability to soothe. Yet it also hints at the cosmic irony that such a peacemaker would reign for so short a time, her life extinguished just as she delivered the one gift that secured her legacy. Jane was born in late 1508 at Wolfhall in Wiltshire, and though her exact birth date remains uncertain, astrologers often place her sun in Libra or perhaps in Aquarius, depending on which reconstruction is used. If we take Libra as the most resonant placement for her story, we find a sun sign that perfectly reflects her known character. Libra is ruled by Venus and is associated with harmony, diplomacy, and the pursuit of balance. Jane's reputation as gentle, modest, and conciliatory fits this description well. Unlike Catherine of Aragon, who fought openly for her place, or in Boleyn, who blazed with ambition, Jane was remembered for her quietness. Libra's gift is its ability to bring calm to stormy waters, and this was precisely what she did for Henry in the wake of Anne's dramatic downfall. The Libra sun suggests a woman who sought compromise rather than conflict, who preferred unity to division. Contemporary accounts described her as kind and accommodating, not pushing Henry aggressively, but gently offering him what he most wanted: obedience, devotion, and the promise of a son. Libra energy thrives in partnership, and Jane's entire rise to prominence can be seen through this lens. She did not force her way into the king's heart with defiance, but rather offered him peace after years of tension. In astrology, Libra also represents the scales of justice, and Jane was said to have interceded for mercy on more than one occasion, most famously when she begged Henry to spare the rebels of the Pilgrimage of Grace. Though he did not always heed her pleas, her role as mediator echoes the Libran instinct to restore fairness. Her moon, often linked by astrologers to Cancer, adds further texture. The moon governs emotions, instincts, and the inner self, and Cancer is its natural home. The Cancer moon is nurturing, maternal, and deeply sensitive to the needs of others. Jane's deep desire to provide Henry with a son and her devotion to her family align with this placement. She was close to her brothers, who benefited greatly from her rise, and she was remembered as a woman whose gentleness was rooted in her emotional life. The Cancer moon explains both her maternal destiny and the tragedy of her death in childbirth. It is a placement that emphasizes care and nurturing, but also suggests vulnerability through those very qualities. Her identity became wrapped up in her role as mother, yet fulfilling that role cost her her life. Venus, the planet of love and beauty, may also have been in Libra if we accept the late September or early October birth range. Venus in Libra is the epitome of grace, charm, and refinement. Unlike the fiery Venus in Aries that defined in Boleyn's daring boldness, Venus in Libra expresses love through gentleness, through seeking harmony, and through pleasing others. Jane was admired for her modesty, her skill with embroidery, and her traditional virtues, all of which align with this placement. She was not the flamboyant center of attention, but the quiet, steady presence that calmed Henry's restless heart. Venus in Libra loves through balance, and Jane embodied that energy in her role as wife and queen. Mars, the planet of drive, may have been in Virgo in her chart. Mars in Virgo is not aggressive but careful, precise, and oriented toward service. This placement suggests that Jane's strength came not from confrontation, but from her ability to fulfill her duties with quiet efficiency. She was not a revolutionary or a reformer, but a woman who worked within her role to bring stability. Mars in Virgo channels energy into details, into the small acts of loyalty and service that build trust. Henry, weary of drama, found in Jane the assurance of someone who would not challenge him, but would support him. This placement also highlights the contrast between Jane and Anne Boleyn. Where Anne had Mars in Capricorn fueling ambition, Jane's Mars in Virgo spoke of service and humility. Astrologically, her role as a unifier can be seen in the strong presence of Libra in her chart. Libra seeks to heal divisions, and Jane stepped into Henry's life at a moment of deep fracture. The execution of Anne Boleyn had shocked the court, the split with Rome had unsettled the kingdom, and the king himself was restless and unstable. Into this maelstrom came Jane, who seemed to represent a return to tradition and stability. Even in her choice of motto, bound to obey and serve, she expressed the Libran desire for harmony through yielding. Yet this motto also reveals the shadow of Libra, the tendency to lose oneself in the pursuit of pleasing others. In her quest to embody obedience and harmony, Jane surrendered her individuality, becoming a vessel for Henry's desires rather than a fully independent figure. The cosmic irony of her story lies in how her nurturing qualities and her role as unifier culminated in her greatest triumph and her greatest tragedy. Her Cancer moon drove her toward motherhood, her Libra sun pushed her toward partnership and balance, and her Venus in Libra made her the embodiment of the devoted wife. Yet it was this very maternal fulfillment that led to her death. She gave Henry the long-awaited son, Edward VI, but she did not live to see him grow. In astrology, this is the paradox of certain placements. The same qualities that define a person's purpose may also contain the seeds of their undoing. Her chart likely contained challenging aspects that reflected this tension. A possible opposition between her Cancer moon and Pluto would suggest emotional intensity tied to themes of life and death, nurturing and loss. This aspect often marks lives where motherhood and family bring both joy and profound suffering. Jane's death in childbirth illustrates this duality with heartbreaking clarity. Similarly, a difficult aspect between her Libra sun and Saturn could indicate the burdens of duty and the weight of expectations. Jane was elevated to queenship because she seemed to offer Henry peace, yet that role came with immense pressure to deliver a male heir. Saturn's lessons often come through sacrifice, and Jane's sacrifice was the ultimate one. Her legacy is inseparable from her son. Edward VI, though he would reign only briefly, represented the continuation of the Tudor dynasty, and Jane's success in providing him elevated her above Henry's other wives in his memory. Henry chose to be buried beside her, a testament to how deeply her fulfillment of his dynastic hope mattered to him. Yet history has often remembered her as a figure defined more by what she gave to Henry than by her own individuality. Astrology, however, allows us to see more. It shows us a chart of harmony, care, and gentleness, a cosmic design that positioned her as the peacemaker of a stormy reign. When we reflect on Jane Seymour through this lens, we see a woman whose destiny was written in softness and sacrifice. Her Libra sun made her the partner who sought balance, her Cancer moon made her the nurturing mother, her Venus in Libra made her graceful and devoted, and her Mars in Virgo made her diligent and modest. The difficult aspects in her chart reveal why her fulfillment came at such a cost, why her role as unifier was so brief. Yet even in her short reign, she fulfilled her purpose. She brought Henry peace, she gave him the son he longed for, and she left behind a legacy of quiet dignity. Her story, when placed alongside Catherine of Aragon and in Boleyn, forms part of a larger astrological cycle of Henry's queens. Catherine embodied the Sagittarian truth-seeker who stood firm in principle, and embodied the Scorpionic or Geminian innovator who burned brightly but fell tragically, and Jane embodied the Libran harmonizer who brought balance but paid with her life. Together they reveal how astrology can illuminate not only individual fates but the patterns of history itself. Jane's cosmic blueprint reminds us that power does not always come through force or ambition. Sometimes it comes through gentleness, through the ability to calm storms, through the quiet strength of nurturing. Her reign was short, but her impact was lasting because she brought Henry his heir and gave the dynasty stability, if only for a moment. In the stars we see both the serenity she embodied and the irony of her fate, a reminder that sometimes harmony comes only through sacrifice. Anne of Cleves enters the Tudor story almost as a footnote in the lives of Henry VIII's queens. Yet when we pause to consider her role and her astrological profile, she reveals herself as far more than a discarded bride. Unlike Catherine of Aragon and Boleyn, or Jane Seymour, whose fates were bound up with the rise and fall of Henry's affections and politics, Anne of Cleves managed to step aside gracefully from the most dangerous stage in England and to carve out a rare place of security and independence. She is often remembered as the Flanders mare, a cruel label given to her by Henry himself after finding her not to his taste. But when read through astrology, her story emerges not as one of humiliation, but as one of resilience, pragmatism, and quiet success. Born on the 22nd of September in 1509, and was a Virgo sun, and that placement already begins to explain her careful, adaptable approach to the challenges she faced in England. Virgo energy thrives on practicality, analysis, and the ability to adjust to circumstances. Unlike fire signs that charge forward with boldness or water signs that lead with emotion, Virgo operates by observing, understanding, and quietly recalibrating. Anne's Virgo sun gave her the wisdom to accept what she could not change and to adapt her role when her marriage to Henry collapsed after only a few months. Instead of clinging to a failed union, she accepted the annulment, secured her independence, and lived a long and comfortable life in England. For a woman in her position, surrounded by danger, this outcome was remarkable. The Virgo sun explains it well, for it points to someone who values order, peace, and practical security over pride or drama. Her moon is often placed in Capricorn by astrologers, which deepens this impression of pragmatic resilience. The moon governs the emotional self, and Capricorn represents discipline, restraint, and the ability to endure. This combination suggests a woman who may not have expressed her emotions openly, but who carried herself with dignity, even when faced with disappointment. A Capricorn moon thrives on stability and structure, and found these not in her brief marriage, but in her life afterward, when she became the king's beloved sister, granted property and status that allowed her to live without fear. This placement would have given her the emotional maturity to accept her new role and even to thrive within it, while other queens paid with their lives for much less. Venus in Libra, likely in her chart given her date of birth, also speaks to her role as a diplomat and her ability to maintain harmony even in the face of rejection. Venus in Libra is refined, graceful, and deeply attuned to relationships. Though Henry dismissed her for her appearance and managed to cultivate goodwill with him after their annulment, remaining on friendly terms and often visiting court. This reflects the Libran gift for diplomacy and the ability to maintain balance where others might have given way to bitterness. Venus in Libra loves harmony and chose peace over pride. Instead of protesting Henry's rejection, she negotiated for her own security, a decision that ensured her survival and comfort. Mars, the planet of drive, is thought to have been in Scorpio in Anne's chart, giving her hidden reserves of strength and determination. Mars in Scorpio is not loud or showy, but it is relentless in pursuing its goals. It allows a person to endure hardship and to strategize quietly, and may have seemed mild, but she possessed a core of strength that enabled her to accept a humiliating annulment without breaking. Mars in Scorpio also provides an ability to transform loss into power, and this is exactly what Anne did. She turned the failure of her marriage into the foundation of her independence, a remarkable feat in Henry's court. Astrologically, her chart paints a picture of a woman whose survival was no accident. The Virgo sun made her adaptable, the Capricorn moon gave her emotional resilience, the Venus in Libra gave her grace and diplomacy, and the Mars in Scorpio gave her inner strength. Together, these placements created a personality capable of navigating one of the most dangerous courts in Europe and emerging not only alive but respected. While others died for defying Henry or for failing to give him sons, and lived quietly in England, enjoying her estates, her household, and her independence. The challenging aspects in her chart reveal the trials she faced, but they also highlight her resilience. A possible square between her sun in Virgo and Saturn suggests that she would face limitations and disappointments, particularly in roles of authority or recognition. Indeed, her brief reign as queen was curtailed by Henry's rejection, a classic manifestation of Sun-Saturn tension. Yet this same aspect often gives individuals the patience and humility to endure hardship, and Anne's ability to accept her situation with grace reflects this lesson. Another likely aspect between her moon in Capricorn and Uranus suggests sudden disruptions in her personal life, which fits the abrupt end to her marriage. But Capricorn's steady nature allowed her to turn that disruption into stability rather than chaos. Her astrological profile explains why her story diverged so sharply from Henry's other wives. Where Catherine of Aragon held firm in principle and lost everything, wherein Boleyn's fire consumed her, and where Jane Seymour's nurturing led to sacrifice, and of Cleves used adaptability to survive. She did not fight for her position, but neither did she despair. Instead, she turned rejection into opportunity. The cosmic irony is that her short-lived marriage, often overlooked in the grand drama of the Tudors, was a turning point that shaped Henry's next choices. Her failure as a bride pushed Henry toward Catherine Howard, whose youth and recklessness led to disaster. In this way, Anne's quiet story forms a hinge in the larger Tudor saga, a moment of calm that foreshadowed another storm. The cosmic implications of her life are fascinating, and represents the lesson of Virgo, that survival sometimes comes not from grand gestures, but from quiet adaptability. She shows how diplomacy, grace, and resilience can achieve what defiance cannot. Astrology frames her not as a failure, but as a woman who fulfilled her destiny in an unconventional way. She was queen for only a few months, yet she secured a life of freedom that none of Henry's other wives enjoyed. The stars whisper that her purpose was not to reign, but to demonstrate another kind of power, the power of survival through wisdom and humility. Her legacy, though often overshadowed, is important. She proved that a woman could navigate the perils of Henry's court without losing her life. She carved out space for herself and lived comfortably until 1557, outliving Henry and witnessing the reigns of his children. This longevity itself is remarkable, and it speaks to the protective qualities in her chart. Virgo's pragmatism, Capricorn's endurance, Libra's diplomacy, and Scorpio's quiet strength combined to create a life that may not have shone brightly, but that endured. When placed alongside Catherine of Aragon and Boleyn and Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves adds a new dimension to the astrological cycle of Henry's queens. Catherine represented unwavering principle and Boleyn burning ambition, Jane nurturing harmony, and Anne of Cleves pragmatic adaptability. Each queen embodied different archetypes, and together they form a cosmic pattern of strength, vulnerability, and resilience. Anne of Cleves may not have worn the crown for long, but in her survival, she became a quiet victor, showing that sometimes the greatest triumph is not in ruling, but in enduring. Her story reminds us that astrology is not only about drama, but also about subtlety. The Virgo sun does not seek glory but contentment, the Capricorn moon does not crave passion but stability, Venus in Libra seeks peace rather than power, and Mars in Scorpio finds strength in endurance. These placements shaped Anne's path and allowed her to succeed in ways others could not. She was overlooked in her own time, and she is often overlooked now, but through the stars we can see her true strength. She was the diplomat, the survivor, the woman who turned rejection into freedom. In the cosmic script of Henry's queens, Anne of Cleves plays the role of the quiet strategist, whose wisdom carried her farther than any crown. Catherine Howard's story begins as if it were written to contrast everything about Anne of Cleves. Where Anne represented restraint, pragmatism, and the slow wisdom of Virgo and Capricorn, Catherine Howard embodied the restless sparkle of youth and the impulsive heat of desire. She was young, beautiful, full of energy, and quite unlike Henry's previous wives. Her place in the narrative of the Tudors feels almost fated, as though the stars aligned to provide Henry with a brief return to vitality after the pragmatic calm of Anne of Cleves. Yet, just as swiftly as she appeared, Catherine's flame was extinguished, leaving behind one of the most tragic chapters in Tudor history. Examining her life through astrology reveals not only her personality, but also the cosmic forces that shaped her rise and fall. Catherine was born around the year 1521, though the exact date is uncertain. Without a precise birth chart, astrologers must work with symbolic placements and archetypal energies rather than fixed degrees. Yet even through this veil of uncertainty, the outlines of her character can be traced. Catherine was a teenager when she caught Henry's eye, and the youthful vivacity that defined her is the first feature that astrology must explain. She radiated the energy of fire and air signs, particularly Leo and Gemini. These signs are associated with joy, charm, sociability, and playfulness. Fire signs burn brightly with confidence and charisma, while air signs thrive in communication, curiosity, and lightness. Together, they suggest the spirited girl who dazzled an aging king, but who lacked the stability and foresight necessary to survive the dangers of the court. If we imagine her sun in Leo, a plausible placement for someone with her traits, we begin to see the outlines of her story. The sun in Leo shines with warmth, exuberance, and a desire to be noticed. Leo is ruled by the sun itself, and it craves recognition, admiration, and affection. For Catherine, still in her teenage years, the attention of a king must have felt like the ultimate stage. Her Leo-like radiance would have made her the center of attention in any room, and Henry, burdened by age, pain, and disappointment, would have found her energy intoxicating. The sun in Leo thrives on romance and grandeur, and Catherine was thrust into a role where such qualities seemed like virtues. But astrology reminds us that Leo, when immature, can also be impulsive, self-indulgent, and blind to consequences. Catherine's youth meant that the stabilizing lessons of time and experience had not tempered her fire. The moon, governing emotions and inner life, may have been in Gemini or Sagittarius, both of which suit her personality and choices. A Gemini moon brings curiosity, restlessness, and a desire for novelty. It struggles with consistency, but thrives on excitement. Catherine's reported flirtations, her desire for attention, and her inability to remain cautious in her relationships reflect this Gemini restlessness. Alternatively, a Sagittarius moon would emphasize impulsiveness, love of freedom, and disregard for limits. Either placement points to someone who lived in the moment, who felt alive when experiencing joy and affection, but who found it difficult to navigate responsibility and caution. In the dangerous world of Henry's court, where discretion meant survival, such lunar tendencies left her vulnerable. Venus, the planet of love and desire, is central to Catherine's story. A likely placement for her is Venus in Libra or Sagittarius. Venus in Libra emphasizes charm, beauty, and the desire to be adored. Catherine was remembered as lively and attractive, qualities Venus in Libra amplifies. She thrived on admiration, and her relationships seemed to revolve around pleasure and attention. Venus in Sagittarius, on the other hand, suggests a love of freedom, playful flirtation, and risk-taking in matters of the heart. Both placements would fit a young queen who, despite her exalted position, continued to act as though the rules of the court did not apply to her. Venus in Libra would explain her irresistible charm, while Venus in Sagittarius would explain her reckless disregard for consequences. Perhaps her chart contained both influences, blending beauty with danger. Mars, ruling passion and drive, may have been in Aries or Leo. These placements bring intensity, boldness, and a need for excitement. Mars in Aries acts without thought, pursuing desire in the moment. Mars in Leo amplifies dramatic romantic gestures and a craving for admiration. In either case, Catherine's Mars suggests that her impulses in love were difficult to control. Her alleged affairs during her queenship, whether exaggerated or true, reflected a young woman driven more by passion and impulse than by caution or calculation. Where Boleyn used her wit and ambition to climb, Catherine seemed driven simply by youthful desire and a lack of foresight. The challenging aspects in her chart speak to the forces that shaped her downfall. A square between her Sun and Saturn, if present, would suggest the tension between her joyful, carefree nature and the harsh limitations imposed by her environment. Saturn represents authority, restriction, and consequence, and Catherine's life demonstrates how a youthful spirit collides with the realities of power. She may have felt caged by the expectations of her role as queen, yearning for the freedom of her earlier life. Another possible aspect, a Venus-Mars opposition, would emphasize conflict between her desires for love and her impulses toward passion. This could explain her inability to remain discreet or to balance affection with responsibility. Astrology suggests that the very qualities that drew Henry to her also contain the seeds of her destruction. Catherine's tragedy is best understood through the symbolism of Uranus and Neptune. Uranus represents sudden upheaval, disruption, and shock. Neptune represents illusion, fantasy, and confusion. Her reign was marked by the sudden shift from Henry's contentment to his wrath. Uranus' energy reflects how quickly fortune turned, as she was elevated to the throne with great fanfare, only to be destroyed by scandal in less than 2 years. Neptune reflects the illusions at play. Catherine may have believed that her charm could protect her, or that her love life could remain hidden. She lived as though in a dream, disconnected from the harsh reality of Tudor politics. When those illusions collapsed, Neptune revealed its darker side: disillusionment, betrayal, and downfall. Her youth is the most important lens through which astrology must interpret her fate. Catherine was barely out of girlhood, thrust into the role of queen beside a king who was decades older, obese, and increasingly irritable. The stars suggest that her chart emphasized vitality and playfulness, qualities poorly suited for the burden of queenship in Henry's court. Unlike Anne of Cleves, who adapted with pragmatic humility, Catherine lacked the tools of patience and foresight. Her cosmic map pointed her toward joy and passion, not caution or endurance. In another life, her spirited nature might have led her to happiness, but in the Tudor court, it led her only to tragedy. Her downfall signaled not only the end of her own life, but also a shift in Henry's personal story. With Catherine's execution in 1542, Henry seemed to lose his appetite for youthful queens. The stars suggest that the fiery energy Catherine embodied was no longer tolerable for him. Her death marked the closing of one chapter of his emotional life. Saturn's influence grows heavy here, representing the sobering lesson Henry took from Catherine's failure. Where he once sought vitality and passion, he now turned to security and companionship, which would shape his choice of his final wife, Catherine Parr. Astrologically, Catherine Howard embodies the archetype of the playful spirit undone by her own impulses. She represents the danger of fire and air energies left unchecked, energies that sparkle with brilliance but burn out quickly. Her sun suggested vitality and radiance, her moon restlessness, her Venus charm and desire, and her Mars unbridled passion. But her challenging aspects, particularly those symbolizing limitation, illusion, and disruption, ensured that her light would not last long. Her story reminds us of the delicate balance between joy and caution, between youthful freedom and the demands of responsibility. When we compare Catherine Howard to Anne of Cleves, the contrast is sharp. Anne thrived by yielding, adapting, and choosing peace over pride. Catherine, by contrast, lived fully in the moment, unable to yield, unable to calculate, and unable to foresee the cost of her choices. Astrology frames them as opposite archetypes, the diplomat who survived and the spirit who perished. Both, however, played essential roles in the cosmic drama of Henry's queens. Anne's chapter was about survival through wisdom. Catherine's was about passion undone. The stars whisper that Catherine Howard was not meant to endure, but to illuminate briefly, to remind us of the intoxicating power of youth and the dangers it carries when placed in the wrong setting. She brought Henry joy in his final years of vigor, and her downfall taught him the limits of his desires. Through her, astrology shows us that not every star burns for long, and that sometimes the brightest flames are the most fragile. Mary and Elizabeth, the daughters of Henry VIII, stand as two of the most fascinating figures in English history. Their lives were bound together by blood, circumstance, and destiny, and yet the paths they walked could hardly have been more different. To explore their stories through astrology is to see not only two individual charts, each filled with its own complexities, but also a cosmic dialogue between them. Where Mary's chart speaks of struggle, devotion, and the heavy weight of tradition, Elizabeth's radiates independence, intellect, and the cunning of survival. Together, they embody the dual face of Tudor power, one rooted in continuity with the old faith and the other aligned with the winds of change. Looking at their intertwined fates through an astrological lens reveals how the stars might have both separated and united them, and how celestial patterns reflected their roles in reshaping the English monarchy. Mary was born on the 18th of February 1506. Making her a Pisces. Sunday Pisces is a sign of deep emotion, spirituality, and sacrifice. It is associated with faith, sensitivity, and devotion to higher causes. For Mary, this placement fits her unwavering Catholic belief and her intense desire to restore England to the Roman faith after her father's break with the Church. Pisces' energy often leans toward idealism and a yearning for spiritual unity, and Mary's religious zeal was nothing short of that. Yet Pisces also carries vulnerability, a tendency to absorb suffering and to lose oneself in devotion. Mary's personal struggles with ill health, loneliness, and the repeated disappointments of her marriages and pregnancies align with the Piscean theme of sacrifice and sorrow. Elizabeth, on the other hand, was born on the 7th of September 1533, making her a Virgo. Sunday Virgo is precise, analytical, and self-reliant. It thrives on control, strategy, and careful attention to detail. Unlike Mary's watery, emotional Pisces sun, Elizabeth's Virgo sun grounded her in practicality. She was not led by overwhelming devotion but by calculation, balance, and a sharp intellect. Where Mary embodied the martyr's spirit, Elizabeth carried the strategist's crown. Virgo energy is often linked to service and duty, but unlike Pisces, it does not dissolve itself in sacrifice. It refines, organizes, and shapes. Elizabeth's reign was marked by her ability to hold her kingdom together through diplomacy, restraint, and the careful management of her image. Despite their differences, both sisters shared a deep sense of purpose shaped by their charts. Mary's moon is thought to have been in Libra, suggesting an emotional need for partnership, harmony, and legitimacy. She longed for the stability of marriage and for recognition as the rightful Catholic queen. Her emotional world was shaped by the need to bring balance, but in seeking it, she tied her heart to causes and people that only deepened her grief. Elizabeth's moon is often suggested to be in Taurus, a placement that emphasizes steadiness, independence, and a craving for security on one's own terms. While Mary longed to define herself through marriage, Elizabeth's Taurus moon helped her resist it. Instead, she drew strength from her autonomy and cultivated the image of the Virgin Queen. In this contrast, we see how their moons, Mary's seeking balance in others, Elizabeth's seeking stability in herself, define their paths. Their Venus placements offer further insight. Venus governs love, beauty, and relationships, and Mary's Venus in Aries suggests a fiery, direct approach to matters of the heart. Aries' Venus falls quickly, passionately, and often unwisely. Mary's devotion to Philip of Spain reflects this placement. She adored him with an intensity that was not reciprocated equally, and her longing for love and companionship became a source of pain. Venus in Aries is impulsive in romance, and for Mary, this meant clinging to a marriage that politically aligned with her goals but emotionally left her wanting. Elizabeth's Venus, however, was in Aquarius, the sign of independence and unconventional love. Venus in Aquarius thrives on intellectual connection and refuses to be tied down by traditional expectations. Elizabeth embodied this energy perfectly. She surrounded herself with suitors and favorites, enjoying the admiration and political advantage they brought, but she never surrendered her freedom to marriage. Her Venus in Aquarius made her relationships unconventional and strategic rather than binding. Mars, the planet of drive and will, also speaks volumes in comparing the sisters. Mary's Mars in Leo suggests a need for recognition, grandeur, and a dramatic assertion of will. Her pursuit of restoring Catholicism and her harsh persecution of Protestants reflect Mars in Leo's intensity and desire to assert dominance. She became known as Bloody Mary, not only because of her policies but also because she carried them out with a fiery determination that did not waver, even in the face of widespread resentment. Elizabeth's Mars in Gemini, by contrast, thrived on flexibility, intellect, and adaptability. Rather than striking with force, Elizabeth wielded her power through words, negotiation, and shifting alliances. Mars in Gemini prefers wit over brute strength, persuasion over confrontation. Her refusal to marry, her careful balancing of Protestant identity without entirely alienating Catholics, and her masterful use of diplomacy reflect Mars in Gemini's capacity to adapt and maneuver. Saturn, the planet of restriction and responsibility, highlights the burdens each sister carried. Mary's Saturn in Cancer emphasized the weight of family, tradition, and legacy. Her life was defined by her loyalty to her mother, Catherine of Aragon, and her grief at the illegitimacy forced upon her by Henry's annulment. Saturn in Cancer speaks of heavy emotional inheritance and the struggle to find stability in family bonds. Mary carried the shadow of her parents' broken marriage and her mother's suffering, and she sought to redeem it through her own reign. Elizabeth's Saturn in Capricorn, by contrast, emphasized discipline, self-control, and the building of authority. Saturn is strong in Capricorn, and it gave Elizabeth the ability to carry the immense burden of queenship with endurance. It made her cautious, deliberate, and pragmatic in ways Mary was not. Where Mary's Saturn bound her to the past, Elizabeth's Saturn drove her to shape the future. The sisters' contrasting religious convictions also find their roots in astrology. Mary's Pisces sun, with its spiritual devotion, combined with her Mars in Leo and Saturn in Cancer, made her deeply committed to restoring Catholic tradition. Her faith was not just political but personal, rooted in identity and sacrifice. She saw her role as divinely ordained and her mission as one of restoration and redemption. Elizabeth's Virgo sun, Venus in Aquarius, and Mars in Gemini, however, aligned her with moderation, pragmatism, and independence. She understood the necessity of aligning with Protestantism for political stability, but she resisted extremes. Her famous religious settlement reflected her astrological balance. Firm enough to establish Protestant identity, but flexible enough to avoid alienating too many subjects. The interplay of Neptune and Uranus also shaped their fates. Mary's Neptune in Libra suggests illusions in relationships and an idealism about love and harmony that never materialized. She believed in the promise of marriage to Philip, in the dream of a restored Catholic England, and in the possibility of healing divisions through faith. Yet Neptune brought her disillusionment, as her marriage was unfulfilling, her policies brought rebellion, and her reign ended with little achieved. Elizabeth's Uranus in Aries, however, fueled her independence and her break from convention. Uranus is the planet of rebellion and innovation, and in Aries it bursts forth with originality and boldness. Elizabeth redefined queenship itself, refusing the expected role of wife and mother, and instead embracing her individuality. Her Uranian energy allowed her to craft a new image of power, one that was radical in its departure from tradition. Looking at their intertwined fates, astrology suggests that Mary and Elizabeth represented two sides of a cosmic coin. Mary embodied the sacrifice, devotion, and suffering of Pisces, tethered to the past and to her mother's legacy. Elizabeth embodied the precision, independence, and adaptability of Virgo, shaping the future and crafting a reign that became legendary. Their charts show not only their differences but also the threads that bound them. Both were driven by a profound sense of destiny, both carried the weight of their father's legacy, and both navigated a world that doubted the power of a woman to rule. The stars tell us that Mary and Elizabeth were not simply sisters, but cosmic counterparts. Mary's reign, though marked by sorrow, paved the way for Elizabeth's triumph by exhausting the nation's longing for Catholic restoration. Elizabeth's reign, built on pragmatism and balance, could not have been understood without Mary's fervent attempt to turn back the tide. Together, their stories form a celestial dialogue, one of water and earth, sacrifice and strategy, faith and pragmatism. Through astrology, we see how their fates, though starkly different, were intertwined in a cosmic design that shaped the destiny of England itself. Astrology invites us to step back and consider history not only as a sequence of events, but also as a living interplay of character, choice, and cosmic influence. When we apply the astrological lens to the queens of Tudor England, we are not dismissing the hard realities of politics, religion, and human ambition. Instead, we are exploring an added dimension, one that allows us to see their personalities and decisions with a kind of poetic depth. These queens, so often reduced to stereotypes in historical memory, the pious Catherine, the ambitious and the gentle Jane, the pragmatic and of Cleves, the reckless Catherine Howard, and the determined sisters Mary and Elizabeth, begin to breathe again when their astrological blueprints are considered. Each placement, each aspect, hints at qualities that history recorded but did not always fully explain. Through the stars, we find a language that captures both their strength and their vulnerability. Catherine of Aragon emerges as a woman of devotion and endurance, reflected in her astrological chart that emphasized resilience, spirituality, and a deep attachment to duty. Her struggles with Henry's annulment and her refusal to yield her place were mirrored in the heavens by aspects of faith and sacrifice. Astrology allows us to see her not only as a wronged wife, but as someone whose very essence resonated with loyalty and spiritual conviction. Her chart illustrates the strength of a queen who refused to compromise her identity, even as her world unraveled. And Boleyn's cosmic map speaks of innovation, ambition, and restless energy. Her astrological placements highlight her sharp intellect, her daring spirit, and her willingness to push against convention. Where Catherine's stars suggested endurance, Anne's reflected disruption, a woman whose life was always destined to challenge the existing order. The chart helps us understand how she could rise so swiftly, fueled by charm and wit, and also why her downfall was almost inevitable. Ambition and change often attract resistance, and her tragic end seems written in the tension between planets that both elevated and imperiled her. Jane Seymour, by contrast, comes into focus through her celestial blueprint as a figure of harmony and calm. Her gentle Venusian traits and stabilizing placements explain why she was able to soothe Henry after years of turbulence. Astrology shows us how she carried energies of reconciliation, a peacemaker who brought balance to the court if only for a brief time. The irony of her early death and the survival of her son is all the more striking when seen in her chart, which seemed to emphasize harmony but also hinted at brevity and sacrifice. And of Cleves, so often overlooked in popular memory, finds new recognition when examined through astrology. Her pragmatic and adaptable placements speak of a woman who understood how to turn disappointment into security. Where others might have fought or resisted, she accepted the end of her marriage with Henry and went on to carve a comfortable, even content life in England. Astrology reframes her story not as failure, but as triumph of adaptability, showing that sometimes cosmic signatures gift us with survival through compromise rather than through confrontation. Catherine Howard's chart reveals the energy of youth, vivacity, and impulse. Astrology helps us see how her charm and recklessness were both her allure and her doom. Her placements suggest a lack of foresight and the strong influence of desire, making her especially vulnerable in the dangerous world of the Tudor court. Through the stars, her tragedy reads less as a personal flaw and more as the unfolding of a celestial pattern, one in which the exuberance of youth collided with the ruthless demands of monarchy. Finally, Mary and Elizabeth, the two sisters who carried the Tudor line through its most transformative years, embody contrasting but interconnected cosmic paths. Mary's chart spoke of sacrifice, faith, and devotion to causes larger than herself, while Elizabeth's emphasized strategy, independence, and adaptability. Through astrology, their rivalry is revealed not merely as political opposition, but as a reflection of two distinct cosmic forces. Mary was water, emotional and spiritual, striving for restoration. Elizabeth was earth, pragmatic and calculating, building stability. Together, their reigns formed a dialogue between old and new, faith and pragmatism. What astrology brings to this story is not certainty but insight. It does not claim that planetary placements dictated every choice these queens made, nor that the heavens sealed their fates beyond their control. Rather, astrology provides a symbolic framework that helps us interpret the blend of personality, opportunity, and destiny. It reminds us that these women were not flat figures, but complex individuals shaped by forces within and without. Astrology adds texture to their portraits. Catherine as the spiritual rock, and Boleyn as the innovator, Jane as the reconciler, and of Cleves as the pragmatist, Catherine Howard as the tragic youth, Mary as the faithful martyr, and Elizabeth as the cunning survivor. In considering their stories through this lens, we also reflect on the broader human condition. Astrology, at its core, is about patterns, cycles, and the relationship between the individual and the universe. These queens, living centuries ago, faced challenges that were uniquely their own, yet their struggles with love, power, faith, and identity echo with timeless resonance. Astrology allows us to draw connections between their lives and the ongoing human search for meaning and direction. It shows us that while the circumstances of history may change, the archetypal energies that shape our journeys remain constant. Summarizing their intertwined legacies through astrology offers a fresh perspective. Catherine of Aragon reminds us of the strength of conviction, even when it comes at great personal cost. And Boleyn illustrates the brilliance and danger of challenging the established order. Jane Seymour reflects the quiet but profound power of harmony and gentleness. And of Cleves demonstrates that adaptability and acceptance can lead to unexpected forms of triumph. Catherine Howard warns of the vulnerability of unguarded youth in the face of ruthless structures. Mary embodies the painful beauty of faith held too tightly, and Elizabeth shines as the example of resilience, intellect, and the shaping of destiny through careful control. Each queen, through her stars, teaches us something enduring about the balance of personal will and cosmic influence. The enduring fascination with these women is not only about their connection to Henry VIII, but also about how they reveal the possibilities and perils of female power in a world that rarely allowed it. Astrology sharpens that fascination by offering a tool for empathy and imagination. It encourages us to see them not simply as historical figures bound by the rigid judgments of their time, but as human beings whose strengths and weaknesses were reflected in the cosmos. It allows us to consider how their choices might have felt from within, how their temperaments aligned with their fates, and how the stars whispered truths that shaped their stories. As we conclude this exploration, we are reminded that astrology does not belong only to the past. It continues to offer insight today, helping us reflect on our own lives, our challenges, and our paths forward. The stories of these queens are not locked away in dusty chronicles. They speak to us because they are human stories of love, ambition, fear, loss, and triumph. When we look at their charts, we see reflections of ourselves, reminders that our struggles and hopes are also part of a greater pattern. For those who look up at the night sky and wonder what meaning might lie within, the lives of these queens offer a kind of mirror. Their destinies, written in both history and the stars, remind us that we are all part of a larger story, one that stretches beyond time and place. Astrology offers us not certainty but connection, not fixed fate, but a framework to understand how our inner world resonates with the wider universe. So as we close this journey through the royal charts of the Tudor queens, the message to carry forward is simple yet profound. History is not only about battles, laws, and thrones, but about people whose lives were as complex and fragile as our own. Astrology gives us a way to honor that complexity, to see them as whole beings shaped by both the earthly and the celestial. And in seeing them more clearly, we might also come to see ourselves with greater understanding. The stars that shone over them still shine over us, and in their light we may find inspiration to face our own challenges with courage, wisdom, and resilience. This is the gift of looking to the heavens, a reminder that while we may never control every twist of fate, we are always part of a greater design, always connected to something larger than ourselves. Whether we believe the stars shape our lives or simply reflect them, their presence invites us to pause, to reflect, and to find meaning. The Tudor queens have left their mark on history, and through astrology, they continue to leave their mark on our imagination. And so, to every reader who has walked this journey, perhaps the stars are whispering still, not only about queens and courts, but about you, your path, and your place in the great unfolding story of the universe.